You're probably best known by the public for two of your books, Gates of Fire and The Legend of Vance, but they're really just the first public appearance of a very long writing career. Would you tell us a bit more about your life before those books?
Well, it was deep obscurity, Nick. I started. My wife at the time encouraged me when I was 24 to leave a job that I had in advertising in New York, and I worked for writing for 17 years before I sold the first thing, which was $3,500 for a screenplay, and then I think it was like another 12 years before the first book came out. So it's been a long time. I was in my 50s before Bagger Vance came out.
And what was the inspiration for The Legend of Vance?
Bagger Vance comes from, I ripped it off from the Bhagavad Gita, from the Vedic scripture, that was Gandhi's favorite book, the Hindu Bible. And in the Bhagavad Gita, if your readers aren't familiar with it, it's the troubled warrior Arjuna receives spiritual instruction from his charioteer, Krishna, i.e. God in human form. So I just switched it over to golf, made the metaphor golf. I grew up as a caddy in golf, so I said instead of a troubled warrior, it's a troubled golf champion. Instead of his charioteer, it's his caddy. And I'm a big believer in stealing, particularly from the best sources possible, so that's where that came from.
I think one of the most powerful bits of the book is the idea of the authentic swing, that inside everybody there's something very authentic. Would you talk about that aspect of it?
That's a very good question. It's and the idea of the authentic swing is sort of just kind of came out of nowhere in the middle of writing. It wasn't something that I planned to start with, but once it sort of appeared on the page, I said, "Wow, this is something. There's something about this." And I've in thinking about it since then, I really believe it's sort of what I really believe about life, which is that we are born not as a blank slate. When we come into this world, not as just a soul that anything can be imprinted on, but we already have our own highly individuated soul, like Wordsworth said in Intimations of Immortality, trailing clouds of glory do we come. And it's really, in this view, the authentic swing means that we're all born with our own swing. And it's really true on the golf course, too. You can't make somebody swing like Tiger Woods. Just Tiger has that swing, you know. Otherwise, Ernie Els has his swing and so forth. So that the metaphor of that in our real life is sort of like Karen Horney's concept of the authentic self, that our job is to find out who we already are and then become that, rather than just pick some idea we want to be this and then, you know, mash ourselves into being that. So that is sort of the broader implications of the idea of the authentic swing.
And it's one of the struggles that many people have then, do you think, that's the struggle between the authentic self and the conditioned self, the thing that we think we should be?
I think so. I think in many ways that's what life is about a lot of times. And I think that a lot of times people don't even have the idea that there is a self that they're trying to become. That idea isn't even there. And of course we're conditioned by our parents and society and everything to do certain things, but yet there's always that creative voice inside, whether that's telling us and nudging us in that direction. And the question is finding the confidence and the faith and the courage to follow it.
So you believe that we all have a destiny. How do you see the difference between destiny and fate? Because for many people, I think they confuse the two things.
Wow, I don't really know what fate is. Maybe fate has something to do with other forces out there. But I certainly believe that we do have a destiny. We all have, sometimes we have more than one talent, but we certainly, all of us have one talent. It doesn't necessarily have to be an artistic talent or something. It may be a gift for helping other people or for guiding other people, being a mother, opening our own business, following our star in that way. But I think we all do. And the real problem, I think, in modern life, in this postmodern world that we live in, is that we're never given credit for that. It's almost as though the idea of having a destiny, maybe that applies to JFK or something like that, but not to the rest of us peons. And I think that's not true at all, that we all have a star that's calling us to follow it.
And what are the pointers that we can use to find our own destiny?
That's another really good question. I mean, I think, you know, in The War of Art, this other book of mine about, I talk about resistance, which is the force of, as I define it, capital R resistance, a kind of self-sabotage and that prevents us from doing the thing we were meant to do. And resistance usually takes form as fear. we're afraid to leave our jobs and start another career, or we're afraid to write that novel or start that garage band or whatever it is. And I think that sometimes we can use that fear whatever to guide us to what we're supposed to do, because at least it's my belief that whatever it is our calling is, our real calling, we'll be more afraid of that than anything else. So if we can just kind of ask ourselves a question, what strikes the deepest terror in our hearts, that's a really good indicator, I think, that that's what we should be doing.
So do you think most people actually live their life in resistance? Because it seems to me that a lot of people do actually live life in a form of resistance.
I do think
that's
that.
true?
I do think that, and I think it's probably the crowning sort of tragedy or sad thing in the world. I'm a believer that we have two lives. You know, we have the life we live, and then we have an unlived life within us. And when we don't follow out that unlived life, that thing that's our calling, things happen to us. I think we develop vices, we develop neuroses, we develop conditions, because the creative drive doesn't go away if it's suppressed. You know, it takes another form. It takes a shadow form, and we'll find ourselves getting involved in various vices, or abusing ourselves, abusing others. And eventually, I think we can give ourselves diseases if we don't live out this thing, because it's a creative force. It's like a volcano. It's like lava trying to come up through the surface. And if we keep holding it down, it's going to come out somewhere in a malign form, in a malignant form.
And how do we move, if you like, from being an amateur? Because I know in the War of Art you talk about moving from being an amateur to a professional. What are the kind of mental concepts involved in making that transition from being a creative amateur to a creative professional?
That's another good question. It's like in my own life, resistance or self-sabotage just wiped me out for years. You know, a divorce, all the other things, sex, drugs, rock and roll, all those other things, and a lot of unhappiness before I finally sort of turned a corner and really started doing my work. Things just became so miserable the other way that I decided I better do my work. It'd be easier. And in rethinking that, looking back and trying to conceptualize that, I've thought of it as turning pro, as changing from an amateur to a pro. And an amateur is somebody who does something as a vocation. If we're thinking about, say, someone who wants to be a writer, wannabe writer, it's like a weekend warrior is what the amateur does. The amateur doesn't really take it seriously. When excuses come up, a reason not to sit down and do the work, the amateur will accept those excuses and believe it. You know, I really do have to go shopping, I got to take care of that kind of thing. Whereas a pro has a much more hard-nosed, almost, a lunch bucket attitude towards things, and a pro will not accept the excuses. A pro will not let fear stop him or her. A pro sits down and does it no matter what. I think, in a way, we're all pros already in our jobs. We always show up for work each day. We stay each day. We hit it as hard as we can each day. We take it seriously. We come in if we have the flu, that's the kind of thing. But yet, when we switch to our avocation, to the symphony we want to write or to the business we want to open, we suddenly become these wishy-washy amateurs, and we don't apply those same standards. So it's the difference between a pro and an amateur in terms of our lives. I think it's just a mental change, just an attitude change. I have a friend, a woman, who took up golf a little while ago as an adult, and we were going out to play one time, and she had only been playing for a month, and she said to me, I have this attitude towards golf. And she says, in my mind, even though I stink right now, even though I can't break 100 right now, in my mind, I'm a pro. And I'm going to go out there, I'm going to focus on every shot, and I'm not going to let, anger or impatience, knock me off my goal. And I think that's it. It's just a sort of a splitting the diamond, just a change in point of view. But it's a point of view that changes everything.
And it seems to me that often actually what we're resisting is the good stuff. We resist success, we resist creativity, we resist fulfillment. Why on earth would we do that?
That's a very good question, and I'm not sure I even really know the answer. I mean, I can give you my sort of deep answer. Should I give you that answer?
Yeah.
It's sort of an answer out of Jungian psychology, where Jung believes that we have sort of two identities. There's the ego, which is kind of a smaller thing that part of our psyche that we use to control our day-to-day life. And the ego is seated in a much greater entity called the self, what he calls the self with a capital S. And dreams come from the self, intuition comes from the self. The self is connected to the what he calls the collective unconscious, and all sorts of sources of deep creativity. I would call it, almost the divine, some sort of a mysterious thing. So what I think resistance has its seat in the ego, in the little sort of self-centered ego. And when our greater self tries to express itself by being creative, by saying, yes, I am going to open that business, I am going to start this new venture, I am going to write my symphony, the ego is very threatened by that because, it's out of business if we, and so that's where I think that it comes from, and that's why it's really, resistance appears when we want to move from a lower level to a higher level, from our baser self to our nobler self. It doesn't go the other way. If we want to go downhill, there's no resistance at all. But if we want to go uphill, it kicks in. So that's what I think it is. I think it's our lower self trying to keep us from getting to our higher self.
So you think ultimately we're resisting our own divine nature?
Exactly. We're resisting our own growth. That's why it's sort of a shadow. There's a sun and then there's a shadow. That's just part of life. Every sun has a shadow, and resistance is that shadow part of ourself. What's interesting, I think, at least in my experience, and when I look at the world, what hurt me for so long was I didn't even know there was such a thing as resistance. I thought when my mind would present these excuses to me, I should be doing this or that, or there are these temptations, I would just buy into it. But when I finally realized that it was sort of like a siren song lying to me, insidiously tempting me like the serpent in the garden, then I could see through it, and I would hear those same voices, but I'd say, I'm not going to listen to that, I'm going to forge ahead.
So how do people in their own lives become aware of resistance? If they're already in it but they don't see it, how do they become aware of it and realize they have a choice?
I think that if you do just start sort of listening to those voices, you can tell when they're lying to you. You can tell if you have a PhD dissertation that you're supposed to do and you've been doing it for 3 years, obvious, and you're not doing a damn thing, or if you have any kind of a dream that you're not living out, you can be sure that resistance. And actually, I know when I talk to my friends about this, and when people read The War of Art, they get it. As soon as they hear, I would bet that our listeners and viewers right now, as they're hearing us talk, people are thinking, oh yeah, I know the thing I should be doing. It's like, we all know what the thing is that we're supposed to be doing. And if there's anything that's presenting us with a pretext not to do it, bank on it, that's resistance.
And you seem to have developed quite a warrior-like attitude towards dealing with resistance. How have you developed that capacity?
Well, I think it's, like I say, I like to think of it as a professional as opposed to an amateur, but it is a kind of a warrior thing too, in the sense that even if you just simply can't, fear is really sort of the nature of resistance. That's kind of the overall thing, at least as I've experienced it, and people that I've talked to have played that back to me. And so the warrior attitude is that you can't wait until fear goes away. You're never going to conquer fear. It's always going to be there. You simply have to act in the face of it. And what helps me to look at it as a pro versus an amateur is a pro kind of demystifies things. It doesn't, pro kind of takes the mystery out of things. It's just kind of a lunch pail, hard hat, get out the tools and do the job. And that's what sort of helped me to kind of make it less of a calling or a mysterious thing, and more of just a craft and a day-to-day job that I'm going to do.
And in The War of Art, you talk about resistance in a way being the enemy, but we also have an ally in the higher realms of consciousness and higher realms of creativity. Talk to me about those.
It's another good question. I like I said before, there's a sun and then there's a shadow. Resistance is kind of the shadow side of it, but things aren't all bad. There's a kind of an equal and opposite Newtonian thing, and it's like Goethe's famous quote about there's a magic in making a start to something. As soon as we start something, mysterious forces come to our aid, which we can't even explain why. We even have serendipitous meetings with people. Financing appears for us, things like that. So, and certainly inspiration comes I believe in muses, I believe in angels. When I finish here's an example. When I finish a day's work, a lot of times I'll go up on the hill here and take a walk, just to clear my head. And as I'm walking and my head sort of empties out, a little voice will come to me and say something like, this word, you use this word on page, whatever it is, and you should change that to this word. Or, we need this character to do this or something. And in other words, there's a real positive force out there, the unconscious, whatever you want to call it, or the muse, that is feeding us ideas in the shower, when we're shaving. Once we start, once we get into a groove, like a magnetized rod attracts iron filings, ideas will come to us, because existence is self-organizing, and that factor comes into play.
Do you think inspiration is perpetually available to people? I tend to think of it as perpetually available, but we talk ourselves out of it so easily. I know when I was in the corporate world and wanting to leave, I thought the idea of what I wanted to do next was too big. Do you think ideas, our inspiration often comes in a size too big for us and that we don't recognize it?
I do, exactly. I think that's exactly it. I think it's like we're so quick to nullify something. It's as if a gift lands right on our plate, solid gold is put in front of us, and we immediately say, well, that can't be for me, I'm not worthy of that. An inspiration, I think, is constantly coming in, but we're filtering it out, we're censoring it, we're not allowing ourselves to receive it. A big part of, I think, finding the courage to make a breakthrough is just trusting that stuff. And not only trusting it when it's in front of you, but trusting that it's going to come tomorrow. I mean, I always joke that I never know where my next idea is going to come from, and any artist or any writer says that, or if I'll ever have another idea, like actors say, I'll never get another role. But there always is another role, there always is another idea. There has to be, just like there's always, the sun is coming in. Creativity is a constant growth force. Like in the Kabbalah, they say that above every blade of grass is a little angel hovering saying, grow, grow, grow. And I think it's the same for us.
Because in the War of Art, you quote William Blake about the idea that eternity is in love with the creations of time, so that eternity actually wants things to come into the time bound. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, I think I really love that quote. I don't know if we had Blake here, he might say, I didn't mean that at all, but eternity is in love with the creations of time. What I take that to mean is that eternity is another dimension, not a time-bound dimension like we're in, but a timeless dimension, and that it's in love with the creations of this time-bound era. In other words, the way I interpret that is that, like, Beethoven's Sixth Symphony already existed in some other plane of reality, but he was the only one that heard it, and that somehow that other plane of reality, eternity, wanted that. When Blake says they're in love with the creations of time, wanted that to be brought into being in reality. It might have existed in these celestial planes, but until an orchestra in physical time could actually play it, they weren't happy, these forces in eternity. And I think that's the essence of creativity, that we're here as receivers and as agents of these forces.
As you talk about being servants of the mystery.
Yes, I think so. That's
what
we're here for, I think.
Yeah.
That
to be that conduit between.
Right. That I think most writers or creative people won't claim their own creations as their own. And they sort of know it's sort of coming from some other place, and they're just allowing it to pass through them, or they're shaping it like a carpenter will shape something. But I think most artists, if they're really honest, won't claim it as their own and say, I did this, this is mine.
And do you think that as we clear more of our own resistance, we become clearer conduits?
Absolutely. I mean, resistance is what's stopping us from the radio. It's like the radio waves are coming in, but not only are we not tuned to the right channel, we've pulled the plug out of the wall.
And what do you find as the greatest rewards of being creative? Because you must love it. What is it that you love?
Well, it's a war every day to do it, as it is for anybody, But for me, it's almost like I don't have a choice, because in my earlier years, before I actually sort of turned pro and began to do this, I had a kind of went through all of the vices and all the things that people do, you know, and it wasn't a lot of fun. And it's like once you've sort of turned the corner and started the flow going, you can't even think about going back. It's just too painful to even think about it. So I think for most artists, and that's anybody, I think we have to do it. If we don't, we're going to be developing conditions, neuroses, and doing all these vices and bad things. So the reward is just to live and to do it.
And how do you keep yourself inspired? Does it just come to you through the muse or the angel, or are there things you do to actually nurture your own inspiration?
Well, every day before I sit down to write, a friend of mine gave me this, the invocation of the muse from T.E. Lawrence's translation of the Odyssey, in which, you know, Homer says, you know, "Oh, divine poesy, you know, help me, da 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 da." And I always say this each day out loud. I ask the muse for help. But I'm also a believer that that there's no real mystery here, that if you sit down and do it, and you're hammering away at it every day, the muse up there looks down on you and says, "Yeah, this poor slob, I'm going to give him a little something, you know, he's been paying his dues." And I think there is truth to that simply the doing of it every day, which is not to say that it's easy, it certainly isn't. And there have been many times in between one project and the next where I've had to really get down and really hammer it out each day, come up with idea after idea, just trying to sort of prime the pump. Sometimes you get stuck, you know, and but sooner or later, believing in it is everything, and not believing in it is death.
And how for you is it, on the one hand, being like the servant of the mystery and serving heaven, as you say in The War of Art, and then being engaged in the world of money and commerciality and
that's
Hollywood
another
even?
Really great question.
How do you balance the two of those?
That's a great question. I once had, I got a new agent once a while ago when I was in the screenwriting business, and as part of his, doing his thing for me, he sent me out like on a bunch of meetings in Hollywood, and I went to, 8 meetings in a couple of weeks, and I got done with them, and I was like so depressed. I thought, what is it that's so depressing for me? And I realized that there was sort of an assumption in each one of these meetings, and the assumption that all of the executives had was, we're going to do anything in the world for a hit. I don't care what it is, how crappy it is, anything for a hit. And they also assumed that I participated in that. You know, that was part of the inclusion, because I was in there trying to sell something to them, and I thought to myself, that's not it. That's not it for me. It's like, I don't give a damn about that. And I thought that the way it has to work was there's like one circle, sort of like this, that includes what I want to do for my own self. And there's another circle that is what's commercial. And there must be some sort of overlap where the two circles coincide, and that's where I want to be. But what got me out of my depression was I realized, I said, I'm not in the business that they're in. I'm not in the business of a hit at any cost. I'm in the business of doing what means something to me. But at the same time, you can't be out in airy fairyland, because you got to make a living. We have to survive. But so I try to combine the two. Another sort of side corollary for that is that I've discovered is that when I try to second guess the market, when I try to say, this is a hit, this idea, I'll do this, I'm wrong. And when I just follow my own heart, things work out much better. When the idea of The Legend of Bagger Vance came to me, I thought, who is going to buy a golf novel by an unknown person based on the Bhagavad Gita? What could be the lamer premise than that? And in fact, my same agent who sent me on those meetings, when I told him this, he fired me in essence. He said, I'm not going to represent this, and kicked me out. And then when the book came out, it had some success, much more than anything else I'd done. The second book of mine that actually had success was Gates of Fire, which is about the Battle of Thermopylae, the 300 Spartans. And when holding the pass, and I thought when I had that idea, I said, who's possibly going to be interested in this? This is another lamest idea in the world. Nobody has ever heard of Thermopylae, can't spell it, couldn't care less about these people. But yet, when it came out there, to my amazement, people responded to it.
So
Whereas other times I've tried to second guess the market and just fallen on my face. So the bottom line for me, at least, is I have better success commercially following my heart.
And is that a supreme act of trust in a way, though, that what you're going to write and you're inspired to write is somehow going to find a niche in the world?
I guess so. You just sort of hope that you're not completely crazy, that what appeals to you will appeal to somebody out there anyway. Now, I don't know if that's true in all cases, but certainly for me, I think when you try to second guess the market, you're asking for trouble, because you're not really doing what's coming from your own heart.
Great. And just to finish off, what is it that really gives your life most meaning? What, at the end of the day, are you going to be most proud of your life?
I'm a believer in the muse. I really do believe that there are forces out there, mysterious forces that we can't see, that want us to bring something into reality. Whether it's a book, whether it's a business venture, whether it's whatever. And that, to me, is kind of what life is about. And the war, the internal war that we have to fight to overcome our own self-sabotage, our own lack of faith, lack of trust, our own self-diminished image of ourselves. The process of kind of fighting that war and producing that stuff is, to me, what my life is about anyway.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. It's been a real joy to meet
thank
you.
You, Nick.
Thank you so
All
much
right.
indeed.